A government-funded study about puberty blockers for transgender teens went unpublished because of politics.
And here's the other thing about chest surgery. If you want breasts at a later point in your life, you can go and get them.
The follow the science crowd is suddenly covering up science when it hurts their feelings. We're going to break down a truly insane story in the world of radical trans activism and so much more on today's episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where I take on the craziest ideas from across the internet and across our politics, all from an independent perspective. Up first, we've got to talk about a truly crazy story where an activist researcher received nearly $10 million in taxpayer money to do a study on the effect that puberty blockers had on gender-confused youth, and now is refusing to release the results of that study for explicitly political reasons, as the New York Times just reported.
So get this, a government-funded study about puberty blockers for transgender teens went unpublished. Why? Because of politics. At least that's what the lead doctor of the research told the New York Times. Dr. Johanna Olson-Kennedy spearheaded the $10 million research in 2015. It was intended to show providing trans adolescents with puberty blockers, drugs that prevent the development of breasts or a deepening voice, for instance, that would lessen depression and distress from gender dysphoria. Researchers recruited 95 trans teens from across the country, gave them these drugs, and watched what happened. Fast forward 9 years later, the results show not so good conclusions. In fact, there was no evidence whatsoever that puberty blockers improved the patient's mental health.
Dr. Olson-Kennedy, a prominent trans advocate in the medical community, admitted to the New York Times that she withheld the results of the study because of the overall political climate. Quote, "I do not want our work to be weaponized. It has to be exactly on point, clear and concise, and that takes time," end quote.
That's right. A massive taxpayer-funded study into the effect that puberty blockers have on the mental health of transgender-identifying youth is being withheld because the author is nervous that its conclusions would be weaponized by political actors, unlike herself, who's clearly not political at all. This story has sparked a lot of outrage online, not least from the outspoken author J.K. Rowling. She wrote in a tweet, "We must not publish a study that says we're harming children because people who say we're harming children will use the study as evidence that we're harming children, which might make it difficult for us to continue harming children." Yeah, I think J.K. is pretty much spot on that one. And the thing I find about this that's so frustrating is that this is the same crowd that told us for a long time to follow the science during COVID, even though they were often misstating the science or overstating it or acting like there was a consensus about things where there was actually a high degree of uncertainty. They told us, follow the science, don't question the science. But now, on this other issue of gender medicine, when the science is undercutting what left-wing activists and gender ideologues believe, suddenly they don't want to follow the science. They want to cover up the science and obfuscate it, which the other piece of this is a taxpayer-funded study. I think the public has every right to know the results, and frankly, it shouldn't be optional. It shouldn't be up to the author or the researcher's discretion. Maybe there's some rare exceptions or cases where a study shouldn't be released, but the rule should be that you must release the results to the public if you're getting taxpayer funded. And then maybe there's rare exceptions you could apply for if there's something that unique circumstance. But yeah, if you're taking taxpayer money, we have a right to know what you did with it and what you found. Whether or not you like the political implications of those facts is irrelevant, and it's antithetical to what science is supposed to be. You're not supposed to be doing experiments with a specific set goal in mind that's ideologically based and then only releasing the results if it meets that goal. That's not science. That's ideological activism. That's propaganda. And it's certainly not something that should be taken seriously or funded with millions of taxpayer dollars. It's just disturbing because we have Dr. Johanna Olson-Kennedy here, who's one of the most prominent transgender medical transition advocates and who's testified as an expert witness against legislation restricting this medicine, now covering up evidence and studies that were performed that would undercut the political ambitions of Olson-Kennedy. And I think that's a really disgraceful thing to do because it shows you don't actually have the kids' best interests at heart. Because if you did, you'd want to know what's the best way to treat young people who are going through this, not want to just promote a certain path or narrative and cover up evidence to the contrary. That is not science. That's not putting the kids first. That's ideological partisan activism masquerading as science. And this woman, Dr. Johanna Olson-Kennedy, is a really radical activist. I want to play you this clip that the reporter Benjamin Ryan covered that I saw over on his Substack, which I'll link to, of undercover video taken of Olson-Kennedy, where she says basically she thinks teenagers can consent and make adult-like decisions, and it's no big deal, and their brains are perfectly able to handle it, with a bizarre twist at the end of her comments.
I'm just gonna say this, that actually people get married when they're under 20. Actually, people choose colleges to go to. Actually, people make life-altering decisions in adolescence. All the time. All the time. And honestly, most of them are good. It's just the bad ones that we talk about. Oh my God, the cinnamon challenge, right? I mean, why do we know about it? Because it's a thing, and it's not common. Like, most teenagers aren't eating cinnamon, right? But some are, and they're on YouTube, and that's stupid. But we don't put on YouTube the things that are really good decisions, right? Oh my gosh, my kid took the SATs. Not a very exciting after-school special, right? But so what we do know is that adolescents actually have the capacity to make a reasoned, logical decision. And here's the other thing about chest surgery. If you want breasts at a later point in your life, you can go and get them.
Oh? That line at the end there kind of threw me for a loop, because I'm sorry, but if you suggest that getting your breasts removed as a teenager is fine because you can get implants later in life if you change your mind, and it's basically the same thing, I just have a hard time taking you seriously. It's not the same thing whatsoever, and people who have had cancer and had their breast tissue removed and then gotten implants, it might be better than the alternative, but it's not the same thing as the original equipment, and for a supposed expert to suggest otherwise is totally disqualifying. And I just can't believe that she's comparing 18, 19, 20-year-olds getting married or deciding where to go to college to young minors making irreversible medical transitions that start at 9 or 10 with puberty blockers in many cases, and then are irreversibly continued with hormone replacement therapies at 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Those are not equivalent scenarios. You can transfer colleges. You can get a different degree. You can switch your major. You can get an annulment or a divorce and get remarried. You can't unsterilize yourself. You can't undo the blocking of puberty and then going through the opposite sex hormone therapy and the effects that will have on your body. They are irreversible. And so to compare them to other decisions that young people make, which frankly, they often don't make very good decisions at, right? Choosing where to go to college, drowning themselves in debt, to use that as an example of why they should be allowed to make different decisions with much more radical consequences at even earlier ages is totally logically incoherent and just the opposite of convincing or compelling. Other than that, though, you're doing a great job. Now, that clip is several years old, but I did just want to include it because I think it shows the mindset of the person that we're dealing with here, and I'm not sure that this kind of activist masquerading as a scientist should have been given such an important and significant taxpayer-funded grant in the first place. This is a huge story. It's a huge controversy, not just in the world of gender medicine, but in this whole new era of debate that we're having over what the proper role of activism is in science, or lack thereof, and our general kind of coming to terms with how much ideology has captured many of our scientific institutions. So it's a really important story in that regard. But how is the activist class responding to these revelations? Spoiler alert, not well. Remember, guys, this was not reported by Fox News or some ideological right-wing partisan with an agenda to advocate for, trying to twist the facts to undercut youth transition. This original story was reported in a nuanced and balanced way by the New York Times. And I do give them credit for that, but it tells you that this isn't some right-wing smear job on this doctor. This is actually just critical reporting of an important story with serious cause for concern, because it's coming from a place that is, in at least in its instinct, pro-trans. It's not an anti-trans news outlet. Yet the activist class, the LGBT activists, are responding to this story not by actually taking any of the facts covered in it seriously, but with cheap identity politics-based deflections, which is, I guess, sadly pretty unsurprising, but still really pathetic. The transgender activist Ari Drennan, who works for Media Matters, tweeted the New York Times story and didn't rebut any of the claims that were made in it, but simply said, "Zero trans people quoted in this New York Times story." And the LGBT activist group GLAAD quote tweeted this post and said, "The New York Times is at it again. Another article about trans healthcare that quotes zero trans people, ignores context, and is critiqued for bias. Today's piece fails to explain how the New York Times itself contributes to the current climate of anti-trans fear-mongering." So yes, guys, seriously, they don't have any substantive rebuttal, any reason why we shouldn't be concerned by this politicization of science by covering up offensive results or whatever. No, we should just discredit the story because it didn't quote a trans person. What? If it was the same story, but it had trans people quoted saying the same thing as the experts that are quoted in the story, it wouldn't somehow be more or less correct. This is identity politics taken to its most anti-logic extreme, where you are substituting lived experience and representation for actual appeals to factual reality or arguments or logic of any kind. To me, it's just a small thing, but it shows how brain broken many of these LGBT activists are, that they actually see identity as a substitute for reason, for argument, for rationale. It's really, really glaring stuff. But to me, it also speaks volumes that they don't have any actual defense for this insanity that we're witnessing of transitioning children by the thousands as minors and then covering up science that undercuts the efficacy of such a practice that is so controversial and frankly so barbaric in many cases. No, they're just going to cite identity to try to shut down the conversation from happening because they know they can't win the debate. These activists really do hate journalism. Benjamin Ryan, who I mentioned earlier, tweeted an image of GLAAD, which parked a truck in 2023 outside of the New York Times office that said, "Dear New York Times, stop questioning trans people's right to exist and access to medical care. Every major medical association supports healthcare for trans youth. The science is settled. Why is the New York Times ignoring this fact?" Narrator: the science was not, in fact, settled. Because just a number of months later, the UK's CAS report and many other public health agencies in Europe would come out with sweeping findings that dramatically undercut the fake, hollow consensus of major American medical associations, a consensus which has also started to be chipped and fade away, actually, as some have started to break off. But it showed that that was really based on ideology and partisanship and low-quality evidence, not high-quality evidence. So the science was not settled. Science is never really settled. Science is an ongoing process of discovery and debate. And they were saying to the New York Times that you shouldn't be questioning the claims of activists and a community when that is literally the job of journalists, is to question narratives and examine them for truthfulness and factuality. So it's not surprising that GLAAD's more recent approach to this controversy is similarly antithetical to journalism or open inquiry or curiosity at all. I found this story really disturbing, but to me, it's just emblematic of one of the things I've talked about at great lengths on this show and just in general, which is the ideological capture of many of our institutions, including scientific institutions and medical institutions, whether it's the DEI madness or it's this ideological trans activism over kind of actual scientific inquiry. And I think we need to root it out, really, stem and branch, and particularly at the governmental level, right? This was funded by the NIH. Sorry, but we need to cut back that funding or at least add strings that if you're going to take the funding, you must release the results. And we need to be specifying funding at the very least going to actual researchers seeking truth, not activists masquerading as scientists. I really just don't think that should be too much to ask. But then again, it is 2024, and our standards just in general are absolutely on the floor these days. What did you guys think of this crazy story? Let me know in the comments, and do hit that like button while you're at it. Remember to leave your thoughts in the comment section. I do take the time to read the comments, and I pick a few to respond to in every episode. So do leave your thoughts below, and if you leave your comment with a super chat or a super thanks, I'll definitely read it on tomorrow's show. And now we've got to check in with the Biden administration because it's now targeting Lyft, the ride-sharing company, in a truly unhinged and bizarre manner. The Federal Trade Commission, run by a far-left activist ideologue named Lina Khan, is now targeting Lyft for supposedly deceptive employment practices and just hit it with an over $2 million fine. But the actual complaints they have against the company are absurd when you look into the details. Lina Khan posted in a tweet, "Firms that lure workers with false earnings claims are breaking the law. FTC has taken action against Lyft for deceiving drivers about how much they could expect to earn on its platform. We've ordered Lyft to stop this conduct and pay $2.1 million. Okay, so if this was true, that would be reasonable enough. I mean, most people agree, like, fraud is bad and shouldn't be allowed. Companies can't lie to you and say, we're going to pay you $50 an hour, and then you do the job and they pay $20 an hour, right? That would be fraud. That'd be stealing. That would be something that should be illegal. But as you'll come to see, the details of this story are not that. Lina Khan explains in this Twitter thread that in 2021, Lyft faced a shortage of drivers. It responded with a marketing campaign that routinely inflated how much drivers could expect to earn through its platform, sometimes by as much as 30%. These false claims led to increased signups, with more drivers joining Lyft. So, did Lyft lie to drivers and promise them a wage they wouldn't actually get and then kind of trick them into signing up? That's what Lina Khan would have us believe. But even in her own thread, that's not what actually happened. She writes, most drivers would not earn the amounts Lyft advertised. For example, Lyft told potential drivers they could make up to $33 an hour in Atlanta and up to $31 an hour in Miami. In reality, these figures reflected earnings of the top 1/5 of drivers. Wait, hold up. Does Lina Khan not know what the words up to mean? Or does she just think Americans are absolutely stupid? If an advertisement says you can earn up to $33 an hour, that doesn't mean you will earn $33 an hour or that a majority of people will. It means that's the highest amount. And if 20% of people are earning that, that's actually kind of a lot. I mean, you could technically make that claim and it would be true, even if 2% were earning it. So it is not a false advertisement in any stretch of the word. Lyft said something factually true, but maybe optimistically framed to encourage drivers to sign up, and now they're being fined and punished by the federal government and fined millions of dollars for making false claims by stating a truthful thing. The math here is not mathing. I am not saying that Lyft is a perfect company or that it is just a dream perfect job to be an Uber or Lyft driver, but there's a reason that people are choosing it over other lines of work. They could get a bunch of other hourly jobs and they're choosing to do this instead because they value the flexibility and making their own schedule. They value the ability to work at times when demand is high and they can get really high rates. They value all of this stuff and they're getting a good deal out of it, or at least a better deal than they would at these other options. Yet the idea that the government needs to come in and nanny state and watch over your shoulder and protect stupid Americans from reading true things and coming away with the incorrect impression is just so condescending and so inappropriate to me. And this isn't the only example where Lyft is being punished but didn't really do anything wrong. Lina Khan explains, Lyft also enticed drivers by promoting, quote, earnings guarantees, which supposedly guarantee that drivers would be paid a certain amount if they completed a specific number of rides in a certain time, like an offer of $975 for completing 45 rides in a weekend. Okay, so Lyft offered people a guaranteed earnings. If you do this number of rides, we guarantee you'll earn at least this much. And then what? Didn't pay the people or paid them less than they said they would? No, they paid them exactly what they said they would be paid if they completed that number of rides. According to Lina Khan's own complaint, she wrote, in reality, Lyft would only pay drivers the difference between what they actually earned and Lyft's advertised guaranteed amount. Drivers were clearly deceived, with tens of thousands reporting that Lyft's claims had misled them. What? So let me explain. Lina Khan's complaint, this top Biden official who's waging this war on all these different companies, including now Lyft, she's upset because Lyft told drivers, for example, if you complete 20 rides, your minimum guaranteed earnings are $500, let's say. And then if they completed the rides, but they only made $400, Lyft paid them $100. So they met that guaranteed earnings of $500 for 20 rides. She seems to think that in that scenario, they should have been paid $900, like a $500 bonus on top of completing the rides. But that's not what minimum guaranteed earnings means in plain language. Now, I can understand how maybe some drivers got confused or misunderstood what that meant, but it was clearly expressed in the language that Lyft used. They didn't say it's a bonus award or a added completion prize or anything like that. They said minimum guaranteed earnings. The least you will earn from completing these rides is this amount. And then they fulfilled that exactly. But now the federal government is punishing them for misleading and deceiving workers. Am I insane? Am I the crazy one? Or is it just me who doesn't think that Americans are brain dead? Like maybe I just have respect for Uber drivers and Lyft drivers and the kind of people that do this job, and I don't think they're simpletons. I think they can read in almost all cases. So I don't see any of this as particularly misleading or deceptive, and I don't see the industry as somehow in need of dire rescue of these terrible companies abusing these innocent people and lying to them, and we need the noble Lina Khan to step in and save them. I just find the whole thing so absurd. And the truth is, there's an agenda on display here. Lina Khan hates private enterprise, hates business. You've seen this. She's just waging war on different businesses as much as she can, using the full might of the federal government with all sorts of ridiculous claims like Apple has a monopoly because some techs are green and some are blue, when in fact, they don't have a monopoly. It's crazy. And it's this ideological capture of the federal government that's supposed to actually be cracking down on fraud or where consumers are being scammed is instead punishing businesses they don't like to save consumers from misleading claims that don't exist. The Democrats are having a little bit of a civil war right now over the future of Lina Khan if Kamala were to win and there was to be a Harris administration like a Biden 2.0. Do they keep her or get rid of her? And you have the far left socialist types who love this woman, but somehow even freaking Republicans have praised her, some who apparently also hate capitalism and hate private enterprise. Yet you have more moderate, business-oriented Democrats like Mark Cuban say, no, we got to get rid of Lina Khan. She's doing a terrible job. She's attacking business for no reason. She's hurting the economy. She's forestalling innovation. I hope that side of the party wins the day. But I am pretty skeptical that will be the case. I really am. What do you guys think? Do you think Lyft did something wrong here? Do you side with Lina Khan? Let me know in the comments below. And now we got to check in with Trump because he's making headlines for a pretty wild suggestion he just made that he's made before, but he made it again at his big high-profile rally he just did at Madison Square Garden in New York that's causing all this controversy. Well, at this event, Trump reiterated a common idea he's previously expressed about adding criminal penalties for people who burn the U.S. flag. Take a listen.
And as long as the Speaker of the House of Representatives is here, I would like to put forward a bill because I watched 2 months ago as some very bad people, radical left people, by the way, nothing happened to them, in Washington, D.C., burned our American flags. They were burning flags. And I would like to suggest that we put in a bill. If you burn the American flag, 1 year in jail.
So people keep making these really outlandish accusations that Trump is a new Hitler or is a fascist or whatever, and I think a lot of that's overblown. But this suggestion is actually authoritarian and totally incompatible with the values of a free society. I would never burn the flag. I absolutely love America, and I think it's a profound and immense privilege to be born an American and to enjoy the freedoms we have. But one of those freedoms is the First Amendment and the right to free speech, which includes expressive acts, not just literal words, and even ones that are very offensive to some people or hurt some people's feelings or offend the national sense of patriotism and love for country. That's the point. that we love our country so much that we tolerate dissent. We're not like the authoritarian countries that lock you up if you criticize the government or if you hate on your own country. We don't do that. Our First Amendment prohibits that. And that is not just me saying that. That is what the Supreme Court famously ruled in a case named Texas versus Johnson. And the lead judge, the lead justice on that case was the conservative legend, Antonin Scalia. Not some liberal judge, liberal justice. This was Antonin Scalia, who Trump has many times praised. They wrote, if there is a bedrock principle underlying the First Amendment, it is that the government may not prohibit the expression of an idea simply because society finds the idea itself offensive or disagreeable. Burning the flag is a form of free speech. This isn't controversial. This is settled law. This is established precedent. And he's just casually suggesting that we criminalize a form of political speech and throw people in jail for a year over it. That's crazy. Imagine how Republicans would respond if Kamala Harris wanted to make burning the pride flag a crime and up to a year in prison for it. They'd all say that's a violation of our freedom of speech. I'd agree. I'd go outside and burn one myself. Now, whenever I make this point, I get a couple of responses that are rooted in misunderstandings. One is that Trump is just saying, oh, well, these radicals, these protesters, these rioters who go out and vandalize and burn American flags on public buildings or whatever, they should go to jail. And that I would have no issue with because they're doing vandalism. They're destroying other people's property. But I have looked into the specifics of Trump's proposals. He said this over and over again, and he is not just talking about that scenario. He means across the board, anyone who burns an American flag, even if you own the flag, you should go to jail. And that is totally inconsistent with the First Amendment. It's a total just in violation of our Constitution and of the Supreme Court's precedent. And he must know that and not care, or he doesn't know it. I don't know. But either way, I think he's just totally off base. Now, the other point that people make to me is they'll show me news stories about somebody who's arrested for burning a pride flag, and they'll say, it's already illegal to burn the pride flag, so this is just the other side of that coin. But what they fail to understand about those stories is that those typically are instances where somebody went on to another building or property they don't own and burned or vandalized a pride display that doesn't belong to them. It is 100% legal to go to a store, purchase a pride flag, go to somewhere where you're allowed to burn things and light it on fire. That you will not be criminally charged for it. There is no law prohibiting it. And if there ever was from Kamala or the Democrats, it would be struck down under the First Amendment in the same exact way that Trump's idea here about American flags would be. Now, folks like Elon Musk keep saying that they support Trump because he's going to save free speech. And I get that the left and the Democrats are enemies of free speech in many ways, but Trump has a very spotty record on these issues, from the freedom of the press to banning flag burning to even he has his own version of the Twitter files, where the Trump administration was pressuring social media companies to take down posts that hurt his feelings, like a post from Chrissy Teigen insulting him. They contacted Twitter to try to take it down, which is what we've complained about the Biden administration doing. So I just got to be honest with you guys. I think Trump has a very spotty record on this issue, and I'm concerned by some of the statements he's making. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below, and do hit that like button while you're at it. And now it's time for Brad versus TikTok, my daily segment where I take on the craziest ideas from the Clock app.
Pronoun of the day is slugs.
Today, we're going to watch a truly deranged video where one dude explains his survival plan for if Trump gets reelected. So this guy is staring into the camera super intensely, and the caption is, safety guidelines if orange emoji gets reelected, because we're going to be unsafe, apparently.
All right, worst case scenario, Trump gets reelected. Here is the game plan if that happens. The general rule of thumb from now on is, will the MAGA heads use it to attack someone? If so, keep your mouth shut. You no longer know that any of your trans friends are trans. You no longer know that any of your non-Christian friends are non-Christian. You no longer know that any of your friends, family, or neighbors are left-leaning at all.
Hold up. He's actually suggesting that if Trump is president again, people who are left-leaning are going to be rounded up or something? Or that he's going to go after people who aren't Christian? What is this dude talking about? Was he in a coma during Trump's first presidency when literally none of those things happened? The trans one, I think, is still over the top and hyperbolic, but I can at least understand being worried about what Trump will do on trans rights to some effect if you're hardcore in the trans rights camp. But this thing about non-Christians, what? Trump's literally campaigning alongside atheists and Jews and people, Hindu people, like all sorts of faiths. This isn't a thing. He's not trying to go after different religions and put them in camps or target people with left-leaning views. I mean, he demonstrates a real interest in going after some of his political enemies, but not just random people with left-leaning views. The hysteria here is off the charts. And something tells me it's only going to get worse.
Anyone that you don't know tries to talk about politics around you, you shut that shit down immediately because that is fishing for information and people they can report. Anyone tries to instigate a protest or a riot, they are also fishing for people that they can report. Anyone you know who is an immigrant, you are now going to tell anyone who asks that they have been living in America their whole lives. Because if you are not among the people who need to flee for their own safety, you are part of the people who are helping them flee.
Helping them flee for their safety. I mean, these people really do take the Delulu meter and turn it all the way up to 10. I don't agree with a lot of Trump's immigration policies, honestly, but this idea that he's going to go round up all the legal immigrants in our country or people whose parents immigrated here or whatever this guy's suggesting, he's not. That's not going to happen. He has talked about deporting all the illegal immigrants in this country. He's not actually going to deport them all. It's not possible. It's such a huge task. And I think I have a much more nuanced, moderate approach to that. I think the true bad guys should be deported, the people who've committed other crimes and are seriously harming us. But I think most of the people who are working here and living here should just be allowed to stay in some form, given some form of legal status, and maybe some of them a long-term path to citizenship. I'm more of a squish on that issue for sure. But this idea that you can't tell anyone if your neighbor is an immigrant, like a legal immigrant, because Trump's going to come get them, or that everyone's going to just be snitching on people to the fascist government. Like, I don't know. I could be wrong, and that could happen. I guess it's theoretically possible, but he was literally president before and never did anything of this sort. So I feel like that's a pretty good basis to go off of, but maybe I'm the crazy one. Maybe I'm the one who's been hitting the crack pipe one too many times. I don't know. This guy has much more to fill us in on.
You do not brag about the people you have helped. You do not tell others about the people you have helped. You keep your mouth shut about all of it on every single possible forum.
This guy is giving white savior more than anyone I've seen in a long time. And that's saying something. He's like, all the people you've saved, you can't tell anyone about it. What a hero you are, because then they'll know and somehow they'll be snitched. If there's no people you've saved, you're not, this isn't the Hunger Games. You're not the heroine of a dystopian novel. Like, come back to earth. Come back to reality. We miss you here.
Anyone asks you about politics, you reply, who has time to talk about politics? And nothing else. Someone asks you your opinion on global warming. You say, I don't talk about politics. Someone asks your opinion on wages and unionization. You say, I don't talk about politics. Someone asks about your opinion on the basic rights of other people. You say, I don't talk about politics. It's gonna hurt, but that's what's gonna help you and others survive.
Did he just suggest that if you say you believe in global warming, you won't survive if Trump is president? So what? Trump's gonna send the death squad around to kill anybody with a climate change sign in their front lawn? Like, seriously, is that what he's suggesting? What's going on here? I think a lot of these people must have some kind of void in their lives that they're trying to fill by convincing themselves that they're heroes in some kind of existential struggle, rather than the much more mundane and hardly seismic reality of a lot of the things we're actually talking about here. I don't want to downplay it and act like there's nothing of significance up for debate in our politics. Of course it is, but I'm just saying, like, if the everyday person's life is not going to be that different, whether Trump wins or Kamala wins. It's just not. The sun will rise. Even from Trump to Biden, the average everyday person's life didn't change that much. I mean, prices went through the roof. There was COVID stuff. Like, there was serious stuff, don't get me wrong, but we didn't go from American dream to dystopian nightmare or vice versa. Like, that's not how any of this actually works. Let's hear this guy out, and I'm going to try to stop interrupting him because he goes on for a while here.
These are the basic ground rules for surviving a fascist government, which is 100% what Donald Trump has said on camera he wants to put in place if he gets reelected. I am not trying to tell you that he is guaranteed to win. I am not going to tell you that he is going to successfully overthrow the government. I am telling you these are the things that are going to happen if he somehow does wind up back in the White House and what you need to do to prepare. And finally, you may not like it, but get yourself firearms training, firearms safety training, and stay strapped. Because worst comes to worst, you also need to be able to defend yourself. And the Second Amendment is probably the only constitutional right that Donald Trump will not do away with. Probably most importantly, if he does get elected and you talk about your personal politics anywhere on social media, you need to delete that account in its entirety immediately. There will still be archived evidence of it, but at the very least they can't go into a profile that you are still using and say that those are still your views, which can be the difference between walking free and being in a camp.
Being in a camp. My man's here actually thinks people are going to be rounded up and put into camps because of what they say on social media. Trump has never said he's going to do anything like that, and if he did, he'd be blocked by the Supreme Court. He couldn't do that if he wanted to. It's just all so delusional and detached from reality. I mean, I will say I'm a believer in the Second Amendment, so anybody who wants to exercise their rights, go ahead. It is slightly concerning to me, the idea of people with this kind of severe delusions and potential schizophrenia or some sort of hallucination disorder having firearms, but that is the right in our country that they're free to exercise, I guess. So I don't have too much to complain about that one, but I feel bad for this man, and I feel bad for the so many young people who've just been brainwashed into this state of paranoia and fear that is simply not justified by the facts. And so they're living in this state of emotional and mental distress, and that takes a real toll on you as a person, and it negatively affects your life in so many ways. But they're doing it all based on things that aren't real, or at least are vastly exaggerated and overhyped. I'm not saying there's nothing of importance at stake in our election. Of course there is profound things of importance, but it is not this doomsday event or scenario that they're making it out to be. They said all the same things back in 2015, 2016, and none of it came true. I was told gay people would be put in camps and electroshocked by Daddy Mike Pence, and unless I was in a coma and missed that part, it didn't happen. Again, so many things they predicted didn't happen. And maybe I'm the crazy one, but I think this TikToker's delusional fantasies would fall into that camp. What did you guys think of this wild video? Let me know in the comments below, and do hit that like button to reward me suffering through the depths of Delulu on the Hell app. And now I'll round out today's show with a few of your comments from the last episode. One person writes, Brad, corporate greed is real. Look at how farmers are priced out of the marketplace, or how supermarkets are lowering prices one moment only to increase the lower price that is at a higher rate than when they first started and call it a special. So the rest of this comment was kind of hard to follow. But no, to be clear, guys, I'm never saying that corporate greed isn't real. My point is that corporations are always greedy. So to blame that for inflation when they were greedy before and they're greedy now doesn't make sense, because that didn't change. That's my point, guys. Not that corporations aren't greedy. I mean, they exist to maximize profit. That's just a fact. Another person says, seems to me like the time has come for some pushback, as in women in locker rooms pushing fully intact, undressed men back out into the hallway. Of course, that's easy for me to say from the comfort of my recliner as an old lady who hasn't been to the gym in 10 years, but I'd like to think that if I were in that situation, I would try to rally the other women in the room around to inform the man that he's not welcome there. I'm not transphobic for the record, but I am very anti whatever that is that he was doing, and we need to stop being afraid of hurting the feelings of people on the left. Can we band together and start saying, no, this is not acceptable? Yeah, I think people should speak out against it. I don't think they should physically try to remove anyone. That's an escalation that wouldn't go well potentially. But I think women have every right to say, we're not comfortable with you being here and you should leave. And if that person won't leave in that kind of scenario, like we talked about last episode, then I guess the women have to. And that really sucks for them. I wish it wasn't like this. Another person says, you are my number one news source. I appreciate your honesty and neutrality. It's exactly what I stand for. Thank you for being so many people's voice for the people like us. Well, thank you so much. I'm not sure I should be your number one news source. I could think of a few more heavy-hitting sources or more objective or covering more substantive things, but I am glad you enjoy my coverage and hopefully find some of it informative and entertaining as well. Another person says, as a 21-year-old black gay guy in the military, it's funny how these people think that most of us are uneducated white cis males, cis is in quotes, when in actuality, most of us are from the community these people think they are fighting for. Our military is such a diverse group of racial minorities. Most of us come from poor backgrounds. A lot of us join at 18 to 20, and plenty join for furthering their education. All of these qualities are things Democrats claim to represent or support, but they continually disrespect and demonize us. Most of these people have never talked to someone in the military, let alone care about our struggles. Thank you, Brad, for bringing me entertainment at work. Well, thank you for serving the country and helping to keep us safe. I think elected Democrats do a good job of at least pantomiming their support for the troops, but the progressive lefty commentators really do seem to just hate the military and hate all cops. And even if you support reforms of these institutions, that's such a toxic and negative way to approach the issues. Another person says, I've never found you annoying or arrogant, and I disagree with about 25% of your takes. Don't sweat the haters, babe. You're amazing. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And I hope that you guys, I don't expect you to agree with every opinion I have, but I hope that you find them interesting to listen to, even if you don't agree, and that you can stick around and participate in the conversation we're always having here. Another person says, when did it become acceptable to talk while stuffing your face? Way too many people do that on the internet. Please learn manners. Thanks. Yes, I'm sick of seeing people talk and chew with their mouth open and me looking at their half-eaten, dusty-ass, mushy food while they're saying some insane delulu. The least we deserve is your unmitigated attention while you rot our brains from the inside. All right, everybody. That's it for this episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast. Thank you so much for joining me and tuning in. Please do make sure to subscribe if you aren't yet, and do hit that like button before you go. Do comment with your thoughts. I do take the time to read the comments, and I pick a few to respond to in every episode. Plus, if you leave your comment with a super chat or a super thanks, I'll definitely read it on the next show. And with that, we'll talk again tomorrow.